Many times organizations are created to solve a problem, and then they solve the problem and then they become the problem. Everything around the conference has changed, but there's this quote, right? The definition of insanity is doing the same things over and over again and expecting different results. More participants, more money, more pavilions, more of everything, but then we won't get different results because the process is flawed. The principal outcome of COP29 in Baku, where they said, okay, we will try to get 300 billion a year. So nobody actually knows where it's going to come from. This money is going, but what we are seeing is that money is not coming down to those people who need it. So when we look at these innovations, there's so many innovations out there, you know. We don't have a lack of ideas in this world, but many of these ideas, they're not yet scalable, you know.
Yeah, and is it then, where does the reason lay in this? So
it's very hard to pinpoint specific, but just to give an example, you know.
Thanks for coming. You're now in person. Actually, our second guest that came in person, and we are here at Startup Studio from Wageningen University. It's a studio that we can use, and Startup itself is one of these places that helps students accelerate their ideas in the food and agri industries. So, but here we are for you, and we want to hear more about what you're doing and where you stand for. I know already a bit about you. You curated Clim-Eat, and you stand for things that I believe in as well. But I can tell the people who you are, but it's fair to do it yourself. So, Dhanush, how would you describe yourself?
Thanks, Shako. So, as you mentioned, I'm here as the founder of Clim-Eat. So Clim-Eat is a not-for-profit organization, and we call ourselves a think and do tank. What that means is we are thinking about interesting ideas, innovations, new technologies, new policies which can transform food systems. But we don't just want to stop there by thinking and researching solutions, but then actually doing it together with partners, which is the doing side of things. So this is an organization which I started about 3 years ago, exactly 3 years ago, actually. We've completed 3 years of operations now. It's based here in the Netherlands, but we operate globally in Asia and Africa as well, and hopefully expanding to Latin America next year. I'm originally from India, but I also live in the Netherlands now for the last 4 years.
Last 4 years.
When did you decide to move to the Netherlands? It was for work?
Yeah, I moved here during COVID. It was in September, October 2020.
Me too. I also came here during COVID, I remember.
Yeah. So I was a part of a large international research program of the CGIAR, which had an office in Wageningen University campus. So I moved here as part of that job. That finished at the end of 2021. And then instead of trying to find another job or within the Netherlands or somewhere else in the CGIAR, I decided to create Clim-Eat.
Yeah, we have to go soon into why you created it, but I want to know more about yourself, because in the far beginning, were you already thinking about acting on sustainability goals in your life?
Not really. I grew up in a business family, and I was always more interested in business and making lots of money. So I initially...
Me too. No.
So I was growing up in India, and I was mostly interested in how can I make more money. So I went to university. I studied business and accounting as my first degree. Then as my second degree, I did a MBA, business administration masters in India, and I wanted to set up my own business. But then there was a point where I was like, okay, is this what I really want to do? And I had a bit of a reflective phase. And at the end of the phase, I was like thinking, I want to do something more for society. And then I looked around to see what are the issues in India at that time, which I felt most passionate about. And I found environmental degradation, climate impacts to be quite severe and potentially getting more severe. And we have not preparing for it. So that's when I started on a journey towards sustainability. Then I wanted to work or make a contribution here, but I didn't have any background in it. So I then went to Scotland. I did a second master's degree in carbon management, studying about climate change, science, economics, business. Yeah, so that's when I really started on into this career.
Do you still know the moment that changed your mind? Like, this is more impactful work I can work of, well, instead of like fully focused on only money?
Yeah, I know the moment. Actually, I was reading a book. It's called The Fountainhead
Okay.
by Ayn Rand. And the book was about personalities. It's about a philosophy called objectivism. And it's about more about personalities and leadership styles and so on. Basically, it says you don't have to try to be like everybody else and you can follow your own path. I found that quite empowering, that notion that I don't have to go into a career in business and make money and there's no pressure. I can decide which path I would like to take.
I mean, and then you have to execute it, right? Like, I mean, you can see these things all over the internet nowadays. It's like, but then executing it is, or going for it is the hardest part. So how did you do that?
Yeah, so I was feeling not so confident about that because, like I said, I had no background. Good intentions are good, but how do you do that? So that's why I then decided to study again, which I didn't necessarily have to do that at that time because I already had a master's degree. But I decided to go into another sector, study so that I can be credible enough to work in this field. But that was also not easy.
And then is when you start to be like in the more part of the research side, no? The like because of this project that you were involved within before that it brought you to the Netherlands. How was that? How did that experience in some way the question would be, has that experience in some way affected to the way you approach to problems nowadays? And then not only problems, but to challenges. I think that would be the right word.
Yeah, so I came to research much later. So first I went to study carbon management, and it was like a process of exclusion after that. First, I went to work for the private sector, was thinking about carbon footprinting and advising companies, things like that. But then I discovered private sector is like policy taker, and you can advise some companies, but you can have bigger impact if you are a policymaker. So then I actually worked in the UN Environment Program, based in China on a new collaborative initiative with the Chinese Academy of Sciences. So then because I thought the UN can be like the policy making body for multiple countries and I can have more of an impact. But then I found that as a program, there are limitations on what you can do. So then I worked in the UN Food and Agriculture Organization, because I thought as an organization, you can do more than a program. I failed. And then I moved to an NGO which was working with farmers directly, but I was a bit impatient for broader change. So it was still not at the scale I would like. So then I moved to research. So it's a little bit of a journey.
Yeah. It's a little bit of a journey. It's quite a journey, right?
Yeah. It was quite a journey. And then I reached research. And what I really liked is like my work was translating research into impact. It was on how does research inform policy processes. That was the main focus. For about first few years, I was purely doing it as a job. Then I also combined it with the PhD on this. And when you're doing a PhD, you become more critical about what you see around you, also your own job. When you look at science and policy connections, there are better ways you can do that, which people may necessarily not be open to doing. So I became more critical about what I see around myself. And I also started identifying better ways of doing it from research. That's when I was like, okay, within established organizations, I cannot test out these ideas. So if you have to test out those ideas, you have to go outside establishments.
Yeah. And what you did was creating Clim-Eat eventually. So how did that happen, like the first early days? Because creating such an organization.
Yeah, I guess that I'm really curious. How did the idea come up to your mind first? Like the idea of Clim-Eat. It was something that was already there for some time and you were saying, yeah, once I'm finished with this, I pursue Clim-Eat, or was something that came after then?
No, it was like a process. I would say it took about a year because it was not just my idea. So some of my colleagues in the research program, they had the idea of setting up a think tank and also invited me into that project. But I was like, oh, we have enough think tanks around, we don't need to create another one. And so that's when I came up with let's make a think and do tank. And then there's a lot of literature on that. There's other sectors of adopted this model of think and do tanks. Why don't we do it for food and agriculture? So then I developed a concept around it and socialized it with partners and funders, because I'm leaving a well-paid job to do this. How do I pay my bills?
Exactly.
Questions like that. It was like maybe about 9-10 months of going around to partners and funders and potentially trying to find.
How was the pitch? Can you like recreate the pitch?
Yeah.
I don't remember now. It was like, yeah, we want to create a think and do tank, and that always got attention because it was a term people didn't hear before. Connecting food and climate. That was pretty much it. But then it raised a lot of questions. What do you do? Who's going to pay for it?
Yes.
Sometimes these conversations can just go around in circles, and that's what I felt some of the conversations were like going around. So you have to make a decision at some point that, yes, this is going ahead, irrespective of whether you get funding or not, whether you get support or not. You should just do it.
Yeah, I mean, so it took you 6 months, you said, before 9 to 10 months even. I mean, how did you do that in those 9 to 10 months? Like you had your own money?
No, I was doing it alongside my job.
Alongside your job, like
so I did,
evening, nights, weekends.
This was in 2021. So I was making concepts, sharing it with people, talking to people. But we officially started operating in 2022. It was just like on the side of my job, trying to develop this.
And what was then the closing moment? Okay, now I step from my job towards my own project.
It was about 9-10 months into this process, because I was being very indecisive. And I was talking to a former colleague in the former organization, was telling her about it. And she was saying, and I was like, I'm not sure. I don't have money, and not sure if this is going to fly. And then she's like, oh, you should just do it, because if you don't do it now, you will regret it for the rest of your life. What if you'd done it,
Yeah.
And she was very motivational.
Yeah.
And then I just decided, based on that, I'm just going to do it. So the next day I was like, I'm doing it, without having at that point secured funding or anything.
How did it feel, the leap? I'm just wondering, how did you wake up the next morning? Like it was like, what have I done?
I don't know exactly how I woke up, but I mentioned to you, there are a few of my former colleagues as well who were involved in this idea, and they're still part of Clim-Eat. And I told one of them, I think I'm going ahead with this. And he was like, are you sure? I'm like, yes, I'm sure. But you haven't got money yet. Yes, but I'm still going with it, And I was very convinced. For me, it's once I make a decision, it's quite easy to just go ahead with it.
What was the plan then? It was like, okay, I am not making money now. Let's see what happens in a year, or...
Yeah, I mean, I had savings. So I thought that savings were enough to keep me going for a year, and it could pay for like a website and some like basic things. So let me just go ahead with this. And if it doesn't work out after a year, I run out of savings, I can find another job.
Yeah. And what is Clim-Eat nowadays? How would you describe Clim-Eat nowadays, from how it evolved over the years?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's way exceeded my expectations. We've been, even from the first year, we've been doing more than €1 million worth of projects every year. So it's grown. Like I thought, if we even got like 500,000, that'll be a big thing. And we've a growing team. We have more than 15 people now within Clim-Eat, full and part-time. We're doing really interesting work in very strategic places.
How does the business model of a think and do tank look like? Where do you get the money from?
There is no business here involved. We just get donations from people.
Okay, so it's
you get 1 million donations already from the start.
Yeah.
Is from people, like from people directly, or is it investors?
It's from foundations. Some from private sector as well, some from governments. It's a distributed sources of funds, but there's no return on investment or anything. People have to
like an NGO,
money.
basically.
Yeah, an NGO.
So tell me more then about the projects you're working on right now.
Yeah. So how we structured Clim-Eat is that we are going to close down in 2030. And this for me is very important, because as part of my PhD research, I was looking at how organizations function, and many times organizations are created to solve a problem, and then they solve the problem, and then they become the problem. because you cannot close them down anymore because there are people working and you can't fire them and all those kind of things. So I thought we really need an organization which is focused on an issue, a deadline. So our issue is food and climate. So we focus on the sustainable development goals on food and climate. And that's until 2030. So we work until 2030, then we close. That's the idea. So coming back to your question. So once we had like a deadline, how do we structure our work? So we broke up our existence into 3 phases. So the first phase, we call it Innovat-Eat. What we do there is we are like identifying what are the innovations that we'd like to promote, like what are the new technologies out there, what are the new financial or policy innovations. So quite a lot of research and analysis to do that. So that's a big part of the first 3 years.
Yeah.
In the second phase, we call it Clim-Eat. So where we want to then be working with policymakers in implementing these ideas. So actually it happens side by side. So then we are now establishing country networks and partnerships so that we can actually do this, And then the final phase is about Impact-Eat, because we realize we should be able to quantify the impact that we make and advocate for bigger organizations to do these things, because we're not going to necessarily change everything because we are a tiny organization. So how can we quantify our impact and then push for the bigger organization to step up? So that's the final phase. So that's how we are kind of broken down into these phases, and the various projects we have, they fit into these phases basically.
Can you take us like maybe in a case study? You have like one case that you're now working
from
with
each phase.
Yeah, so we have a project which is funded by the Bezos Earth Fund. It's basically fits into our Innovat phase, which basically they gave us funding to look at what are the bold bets for the future of food. Like we always talk about best bets, but they want bold bets. What are those technologies and innovations which can really transform food systems in the next 20, 30 years? And they're interested in 3 different domains. One is around livestock management. One is around alternatives to fertilizers. One is around next generation crops. So what we do then is we are screening hundreds of technologies which come out in these 3 domains, maybe more than 240 or 50, something like that. So we keep looking at what's coming from university, from companies, what's on social media, and we are finding all these innovations, and then we look at, can this contribute towards climate and food and sustainable development goals? We're not looking at investment cases, but we are looking at impact cases. So, and then we are building like around these technologies, the basic facts, the scaling pathways, geographical suitability. So all these kind of things, so that's like Innovat for us. We're finding out these bold bets which can transform food systems. So that's one example of a project which fits into our strategy.
And then how I'm wondering, is you approaching to these companies, or the companies can like try to apply for you to help them? How does it work?
To identify the technologies.
Yeah.
We are doing approaching. I mean, they can also approach us, but mostly it's been us screening. We call it the horizon scanning on what's coming out. And some of them, we reach out to them for deeper dives. We don't do it for all the 100 plus, like when we are getting to very specific technologies, which we know are of interest, then we reach out to companies in that sector, experts in that sector, try to find out more.
I'm just wondering, sometimes when it comes to data, companies will have like very different data, the data that they want to show in the end as well, no? And I am wondering, how do you do your screenings for you to know that something is impactful? What things do you measure? Like, what are your proxies? What are your parameters?
Yeah, so there is a paper by several colleagues led by Mario Herrero at Cornell, and it looks at how innovation can contribute to both sustainable development goals. And within that, there is a set of criteria, and we just use those criteria to assess these technologies on their potential for deliver for impact.
So this is phase 1, right?
Yeah.
And we can move to phase 2 and 3, but I'm actually wondering, what is the biggest challenge within phase 1 for you on these projects?
I think it's like the risk appetite is a big thing. So when we look at these innovations. There's so many innovations out there, you know. We don't have a lack of ideas in this world, but many of these ideas, they're not yet scalable, you know.
Yeah, and where does the reason lay in this? So
it's very hard to pinpoint specific, but just to give an example, you know, we look at alternatives to current models of fertilizer production. Currently, fertilizers is responsible for 2% of global emissions. It's quite big, you know?
Yes.
So we need to think about alternatives, and there are many alternatives, you know? But when we look at those alternatives, sometimes they are very expensive, or the current model is so cheap that they become more expensive. So they need subsidies and policy incentives to be scalable. So the food system works, and it works for some people, and it works for certain industries and certain incumbent players, and they get the money. And if you want to come up with something new that's disruptive, their incentives are not lining up.
I really wonder if the food system works. I feel that sometimes, like, because it's true, it works in order to feed the world. That's a little bit like the function that it has, but at such a high cost, now that it's also having like a huge impact in environment and in some cases even in health. That I thought about it is like, no, the food system actually is not working, because working would also consider these parts. And therefore, in my opinion, also, in order to work, we need to make room to these more disruptive approaches. We had in the podcast Caroline Steele, she is the writer of a couple of books called Hungry City and Citopia, where she talks about like the changes that we need in the food system. And one thing that she talks about that I partially agree is that we need food to cost more money, because we need like precisely to pay for these more expensive fertilizer, for example, in order to reduce a problem that might cost us like the living in Earth, you know? But in the end, it's a big challenge, because nobody is going to want to say, oh yeah, for sure, I want to pay more. But I believe that it's necessary that in some way we start to put that idea into at least richer societies. I understand that it's not so easy to go to a country with a low, with low income standards and tell them, you also need to pay more for your food. But I believe that in places where food is more commoditized, there's something that it really needs to be studied and needed to be considered. So you said that the challenge here is that we have a lot of ideas, but there is not enough risk appetite, no? But you mentioned in particular that there's no risk appetite because they are expensive. What do you think that would be needed in order for people to be more eager to assume that risk?
Yeah, so I just want to build also on the point which you made about consumers paying. But, you know, sometimes it's also about the hidden costs. You know, a lot of the activities are funded by, you know, subsidies, for example.
Yeah, lobbies.
Yeah, so, you know, the subsidies to agriculture production is huge. It's like 800 billion or something like that a year. So if we can try to reorient some of this money to the right or better options for the environment and sustainability, so there is a way to shift money that already flows into the system towards things which are much better for people, rather than asking people to pay additional, you know. That would be my view.
And maybe I don't know if we're people to answer or anything, but sometimes I really wonder, what is the reason we had so much money that needs to be destined to agriculture? I mean, I know that there's money in order to make sure that we can feed the people, and I am completely fine with that. But at the same time, it's like, well, this is maybe this money. Why is this money not being used for a fairer food system?
People who are not thinking about it, that's not their objective for giving the money. In my view, it's like, you know, each subsidy, for example, it was announced at a particular point of time. Maybe to win a particular election, you say, okay, now I'm going to give you discounted electricity. When next election, someone else says, oh, I'll give you free water. Someone says, I give you free or subsidized fertilizers. So over different points in time, political masters, for whatever political reasons, they've agreed to give more, and the cost adds up, and we are paying for that through our taxation models. But in the end, nobody wants to
take it back because otherwise they lose the voting. Yeah,
because once people get something for free or subsidy, they won't want anybody to take it back because you feel entitled to it. We feel that as consumers, farmers feel that as producers. So that's why the system just continues and more things keep getting added.
But at the same time, it's not a matter also of only removing the subsidy, but repurpose it in some way. No, so I believe that I am not an expert political communicator. And I understand that it must be much more complex than that. But I think that then it's important to say, like, we are not taking the money out of here. We just destiny so you can. Also, we talk with many people that tell us, like, yeah, farmers also want to go more organic, but farmers also want to do better for the environment, but they just don't have a lot of times, either resources, or they just don't know, they don't have information. They would like to move from this fertilizer to this other fertilizer, but the gap is so big in price that they doesn't make sense to them. And then if it's a matter of like maybe we're putting too much money in one horse, then we just shall say that, okay, it will cost you more your actual fertilizer, but we are easing you the opportunity to move to a other kind that probably will have in the end some sort of benefit in what you do. But I understand that also there are many farmers which do not really care. They just care about like having the cheaper version, I guess.
There are models. So like that kind of brings me to like the second phase of our work is around Implement. And one example of work we're doing is in Malawi. And in Malawi, like in some years, like the agriculture budget from the ministry is like half of it goes to fertilizer subsidies, so which is quite huge, but it's important. So what we've been trying to do there with partners, including the government and the farmers organization and World Bank, is to come up with an alternative to giving fertilizer subsidies. So what does that mean? So compensating farmers for improving soil health. So rather than saying you get money for free or discounted fertilizer, you get money, but your performance is based on how you improve the health of your soil. So it is possible, like if there is political will, if the system actors align, it's possible. So then farmers are not losing out on a source of income, but they are providing a service which is more beneficial for society.
If this is possible, maybe we have to dive deeper into this, how you establish this, because it can lead to an example of more coming.
Yeah.
So how did it start? How do you arrange this as a political change?
I mean, we don't arrange it, right? There needs to be political will. It's not.
But it was you approaching to, for example, the government in Malawi, or it was, and you said like, we have this plan and execute it together?
No, I think it was part of like Malawi as a bailout from the International Monetary Fund. And as part of that package, there were requirements on making changes. And as part of those effort, they were looking for options, and they connected with one of my colleagues and who has been supporting them to develop this new scheme, basically. So, yeah, so it was because there was a political moment where they had to make changes. They were looking for alternatives, and it was a good moment for us to.
I understand that this phase takes a lot of policy changing, like they implement it, because there's a part of investigating what are the possible technologies, and that is innovated. And now it's the part of, okay, how we make sure that there's an environment where we can implement. In this phase, it's a matter of going to the different policymakers and explaining them and pitching them and trying to go also with lobbyists and trying to push for that change? Or do you do not do a direct approach and it's just more like a call to everyone who would like to do a change?
So we don't lobby.
No. Sorry. I meant that maybe you don't lobby, but I understand that when you want a certain change, there will be always groups around that say, listen to what she's saying. Because
so our approach has been, we've had more demand than what we can supply. We've had number of countries who have reached out to us with interest in working with us. But we're a small team, we can't support everyone. So we can choose those countries which are actually very committed towards making changes and go into them. So we look at where that demand lies, and we don't prescribe that this is the solution that you need to do. So we work in Kenya, we work on completely different topics there, for example. So it's like where there is a demand, then scoping out to see, can we add something to what is already happening? How likely is it going to fly? We don't want to waste our time and resources doing things which don't realize any changes.
Yeah. Yeah, I get it. So you're in a unique position actually for yourself and the organization, which actually is good to hear that a lot of, interesting. It's good to hear that a lot of countries or organizations are interested to working with you and that you cannot supply the demand. It's also something that might be somebody else to step up and take them as well in it, right? Because it's will be sad to not work on projects that work on either food and sustainability. Let them lay at the table. I wonder in that phase 2, when you're gonna do the implementation part, over those years that you now have worked on several projects, what are the challenges there that maybe you can pinpoint some out?
Yeah. So, I mean, one is what you shared about political will, and the political will can change depending on who's in power. And very often you see changes in governments, changes in ministers, and those kind of things you might have a good relationship with a certain government and then that's gone.
Yeah.
So that's one risk which we see in the work of this nature. The other is often around getting money to those who actually need it, So it's interesting. So we might be able to identify a project idea, but maybe there's not enough people who are willing to invest in it. So that's been a bit of a challenge as well.
When it comes to these challenges, it's just things that are problems that you need to just live life and deal with them, or do you try to implement some processes, procedures, or systems that you can use in order to reduce the impact of, I don't know, government changing and things like that?
Yeah. So how we work is, I'll just give you an example, so I'll take the example of Kenya in the other case. So we found that in Kenya, they have multiple policies at the national level on food and agriculture, 6 or 7 at least, which I remember. And so we decided, we don't need to do more policy support for the government. They are well capacitated. Then what's missing? So then we took a bottom-up approach to engage in different counties in Kenya to see, okay, the national government has policy. What does it mean for like the county government, and what does it ultimately mean for farmers? And we found that, sometimes depending on different counties, not enough is happening. Maybe because they're not getting enough money or enough technical advice, whatever that is. So we took a bottom-up approach. And so then we worked in 4 Kenyan counties and identified the priorities of farmers, made like business plans, investment plans, so you could invest in some of the things that farmers need. Maybe it's like rainwater harvesting, for example. These are things which cost like 10, 20,000. Nothing in that plan is more than $100,000. But then it's impossible, not impossible, very difficult to get money there. I was at the COP in Baku and they announced $300 billion. They say all these billions and billions, and in the end, but when you actually want money to do a little project, doesn't come. So that's a big risk which we see in our work, because the incentives in the system are not set in a way that money can go to people who need it.
Where shall this money come from? Like, where is supposed this money to come from? From the governments, from UN, from
the commitment which is made, or
when you mention there will be 300 billion euros.
So I don't think it's going to appear. But,
no. But when we talk about this is money that is going to be used. Who is supposed to be managing this money that goes to the different projects and everything?
We're hypothesizing a lot. This was a commitment or a principal outcome of COP29 in Baku, where they said, okay, we will try to get 300 billion a year, but they word it in a way that this can come from governments, it can come from private sector. So nobody actually knows where it's going to come from. And I don't think it's ever going to come. And it's just creative accounting. But that's one point of the discussion. But there is a lot of money going as climate finance. A lot of it is coming from more developed countries as part of their development cooperation. climate finance contribution. So this money is going, but what we are seeing is that money is not coming down to those people who need it because they are stuck somewhere in the bureaucracy. Sometimes it goes to the UN organizations or international organizations who are supposed to implement these projects, or sometimes it goes to the national governments, but it's not feeding down to those people who actually need to make the changes.
And I can imagine in Africa, for instance, that you also deal with corruption in certain places. Or not?
Yes, but I've heard that that's something that tends to be really like a story that has been told in the Western societies, and it's true there is corruption, but in certain countries there is not. It's not just it's the same level of corruption that you can find in countries of Western societies.
I mean, it's about how you approach corruption, right?
Yeah.
And I come from a developing country as well. When things happen, corruption also happens. When development happens, it's unfortunate, but that's reality. But I see often, so there is, in my view, there is an acceptable level of corruption which will happen if you're trying to change things and things are growing. But the other extreme is like now what we have is so many checks to avoid every little piece of corruption that the people who the money is intended for will never get it because they will never be able to get through all those checks and things like that. So it's an absence of trust. We are giving this money. It has to be, there is no room for corruption or anything. So we need to have every receipt you pay for. We need to have this audit system. You need to have this and this. I mean, do you think those farmers in Kenya will have all those things? They won't, So that system is then designed for example, certain NGOs with huge resources and administrative systems who can do all that, or certain international organizations. So they are the only ones who will get money. And there's more money, it'll go to them. It's not going to come to the people who actually need it.
Yeah, so I think it's a little bit like that feeling of we're going to test in X amount of money to make sure but that money will never reach the bottom of the.
It won't.
Oh wow! Yeah.
How are you changing that? Well, you try it at least, right? To move the money quicker towards the downstream. I mean, that's your bottom up approach. As an example.
I mean, we don't actually give money. That's not our mandate, but we are like in the project we mentioned in Malawi, we are trying to develop a new monitoring and evaluation system so that it's directly with farmers through a digital tool.
Yeah, so you take them out.
Yeah, so you kind of cut out the middlemen and you can directly access. So there are ideas out there. We haven't yet scaled that kind of approach, but there are opportunities.
So this is phase 2. We can dive into maybe the COP, but I think we have to go to phase 3.
Yeah.
Where we also are thinking about, in phase 3, are there the main projects laying? Are there the main projects for you?
So it's kind of linked to all the existing projects. So there, what we're doing is currently when we're working in a country, we're drawing baselines. We're developing our theory of change further. Further on in the journey, we'll have midline assessments and endline assessments. And then we'll be able to see, we worked in Kenya and we worked with so many farmers and these were the results and how much emissions were reduced, how much resilience was enhanced, how much money was mobilized. So we will be able to have a full story. And then hopefully with that story, we will be able to go and convince larger organizations to say, okay, we have been able to do that. You guys have billions of dollars. Why don't you do this and more? Because this is proof it can be done. So that's our idea.
You want to come with testimonials.
Yeah. And more advocacy. But we haven't yet got resources for that.
But it doesn't happen to you that you already more or less expect what the response is going to be.
Yeah, of course. I've worked in the system.
Why? I mean, we used much less resources. We achieved this. Why are you not doing this? We are doing bigger things. Takes more time.
Some excuse.
There will be excuses. Because you said maybe we could talk about the COP later, but I think that in the end, everything all here is going a little bit around the COP, because my feeling with the COP and the feeling I see a lot of times on LinkedIn and stuff like that is that it's a meeting where there's a lot of talking, there's commitments, there's everybody saying and even companies, you can say the big corporates of food saying we're going to destine this amount of money to make changes. But to the people that is not there, at least there's always a feeling of this is not going to happen. It's a lot of words, it's a lot of saying we push for a change, but this is going to be or either really slow or not going to happen at all. Just like good promotion for the ones who go there.
So my view is that it's a fail model. So if something had to come out of it, which was radical, it would have come out before COP29 is completed. So that's more than 30 years because there was also COVID in between of this process. And we looked at all the COPs. We analyzed it. There's a paper which I published together with my colleagues. We looked at all the COPs from the beginning. In the first COP, it was it like 4,000 people who went to the COP. The last one in Baku, it was more than 60,000 people. So, it's a conference which has grown in the number of participants that's there. There's huge pavilions. People spend millions on those things. Everything around the conference has changed. But there's this quote, right? The definition of insanity is doing the same things over and over again and expecting different results. So we are doing exactly the same things, but in bigger quantities, more participants, more money, more pavilions, more of everything, but then we won't get different results because the process is flawed. That's my view.
Well, I mean, I guess that the positive note to take of what you're mentioning, that every time is bigger, is that at least shows that every time the problem of sustainability, there's more people that care about sustainability. If either there is people that does it from a honest point of view, or is people that they just want to ride the wave because it's high, I guess that you can only know case by case. Yeah, I don't know if it's necessary that either COPs change the model where they do things. Maybe the approach that you have in Clim-Eat will be something really positive to happen in COPs, that whatever is discussed, they say, okay, so now we're going to put deadlines and we're going to put clear goals of what needs to be tracked, I don't know, or achieve for the next COP. I don't know if that already happens, to be fair.
Yeah, so I think that I have a lot of ideas on how to change the system, but it's a political system and there's a track inside the negotiations where they're also talking about changes, but these things are not going to fly because, you need 194 parties to come and agree on it. And there are vested interests also. If you look at the previous COPs, there's a big petrostate influence in these things. So we may want certain things, but they won't want those things. So it's unlikely that the change is not going to come from within. Where do we see a system coming and saying, please change us? We are not doing our jobs properly. Please change us. They're not going to do that. So we from outside have to make that change happen and put pressure on
another system has to come in place for that.
Yeah.
I wonder, like you said it already before, we have a lot of ideas around the world, a lot of innovations. So it seems that there the problem doesn't lay, right?
Yeah.
We have all the solutions basically. So then the problems lay in the implementation part. And where do the challenges lay there? Because I can imagine one of the things is then systems that are outdated, called like that, or pushing for agendas that are also outdated.
Yeah.
We have seen we need to.
So those are not outdated, but it's just not for the interest of everybody, I guess.
But there's also outdated agendas.
Yeah,
lots of outdated agendas.
So where do you see them? What are the pain points where we have to work on to create a new system?
Yeah,
or that's maybe too big a question, but
yeah. So how do I say this? So where I've been going to COP since COP21, and I was at 29 as well. But I've been following what happens, and every time I know about those are some of the outdated comments are agriculture is part of the problem. It is also part of the solution. Blah 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 blah. At that point, I've lost it. First time when I heard it, it was
revealing, eye-opening.
Yeah. But very often it comes to the same narrative building. But come on, how much can you do this? We know some of the things which have to be done. Let's just get them done. But that doesn't happen, unfortunately. So that's where I would say with the outdated ideas. So on the other hand, if we look at, I'm not saying this is Clim-Eat is just compiling the work of other organizations. There are a lot of interesting ideas. So if we are talking about how can we actually change fertilizer production, there's 30, 40 ideas which are worth discussing. But they're not being discussed at the COP, or not sufficiently enough. So we need to create places where we are not just discussing them, but we could actually get money and policy support to do it. So I think we need to create alternative places to do it, because it's not going to happen through the COP process. Now, actually, there's an alternative process launched by several people who are frustrated with the system. It's called COP, which means, anybody can do like COP meetings. That's kind of the idea.
Like with the TEDx, no? I believe that's the same.
Yeah, so I think we as a community need to come together and come up with, first is like saying, yeah, this is not working, guys. And many people are still hesitant to do that. And then like think about what the alternatives are. I'm sure there are multiple ideas out there.
Yeah, like COP is an example. A lot of events, I have quite a feeling of like repeating the things that we already know. I have one example of like being in the event talking about regenerative agriculture, and then ending that whole conversation of like an hour, and then the last question was, but we didn't talk about what is regenerative ag. And I was like, wait,
are we still
stop
there?
this.
I would come back to every system works for some people. So
Yes.
I was just
yes, when you told already.
Seeing in the news, because Australia is trying to get COP31, and in the news they were saying that they were estimating the benefits from hosting COP to Australia is over $500 million. So, there are like people who benefit, like when you have a COP, people are flying there, they're staying in hotels.
In the World Cup, no?
Yeah,
World Cup,
Olympic.
So, but it's the wrong indicators, If the indicators of success is we are getting our community.
Sustainability is so profitable. Who would have guessed that?
Yeah, but that's what it has become. So it works for, those communities, the hotels maybe who charge huge amounts of money, the event management company, people who build the pavilions, the consultants, lobbyists. So a lot of people benefit. And when you talk about new systems, it's also about all those people who are benefiting and have benefited for 30 years won't benefit anymore. So they will protest.
Yeah, and also it's every year the same with COP. I am not an anti-meat, but every year is the same. Like they all go, all participants of COP. A lot of politicians go with private jets. They go with doing many things that are not necessarily environmental friendly. And then in the end, they also serve to all the attendants like meat and stuff and whatever. And as I said, I think that meat can belong to a sustainable environment, but it's true that in a place where you can also make use in order to showcase other alternatives or make an impact by showing that the diet can be in a different way, it always surprises me that they choose to just have like everything seems to be old-fashioned in the place where everything should be about change.
Yeah. And some of it is like greenwashing as well, because they say we'll serve you sustainable food, but if you're doing oil deals in the back room, what's the point, right? So it's
it was like last year's COP that was in Middle East, right?
Yeah.
That all the oil deals that were happening at the same place. Yeah.
And they said they were going to do a lot of plant-based food. So what's the point in the bigger picture, right?
Yeah, because even then making more plant-based food does not necessarily mean also to be more sustainable, but it's just like what in the ears of the people will listen, no, we're going to do more plant-based or more. So don't worry. Just to say like that is a little bit the feeling I have with the COP. So I'm happy that there is like these initiatives to try to in some way derail from the official COP necessarily. But I have a question then. That we're talking about all these things that seem frustrating. How do you see the future? Do you think that there will be any changes in the next 5 to 10 years? Are you hopeful about what be achieved in 2030, 2035?
Yeah, I like to stay optimistic. It's very easy to just go downhill and get into depression. But for me personally, what gives me hope is actually around people. Especially younger people. It's a generational thing, I think. Like if you look at who are making these decisions, they're from a different generation than, say, for example, Gen Z for now, They have been growing up in the context of climate and environmental crisis. They're aware, they're committed, they really want to make a change.
Yeah, and like the older generation came in other ways, right?
Yeah.
After the Second World War, other priorities at that time.
Yeah, so I think if we change who is making those decisions to younger people, that will change it, because I think if a Gen Z prime minister, for example, is offered the opportunity to go in the private jet, I think he or she will think twice about it, because they are by default thinking about these things than someone else from another age group. It's not being ageist, but I just think that's where I see hope, because the younger people I meet, they're so intrinsically motivated for change.
I was wondering as well, because you were mentioning 2030 in theory, climate, and because that is where the Sustainable Development Goals, that is supposed to be, the deadline. But however, it's really possible now that in 2028, 2029, they will draft the next Sustainable Development Goals for 2015. That is something that is, as far as I know, I believe that before 2030, there were I think there were Sustainable Development Goals for 2020, as well. So,
Millennium Development Goals.
Yeah. So how do you see that coming? When you see like the new development goals, it will be like the new challenges, or then do you really see that they will be, it was until 2030, now we move to something else?
Yeah, we will move to something else. We are not going to achieve these Sustainable Development Goals for sure. And they will come up with new goals with new names. So, but that's not the process side. And there will be new issues we face, for climate change impacts will accelerate. There could be extreme heat issues. So I think there will be new issues that we will have to deal with. Of course, we will need organizations to deal with that. Maybe there are new organizations needed to deal with specific issues. So what we don't want is for Clim-Eat to be pre-deciding what those issues are, and Clim-Eat being positioned as the solver of those issues.
Yeah.
Because then it creates in us a vested interest, which we don't want to create.
So it might be that you become another organization in 2000. You will following the other goals maybe in.
Yeah,
after 2030.
We won't exist as Clim-Eat. No. I've just talked about empowering young people, and by that time I'll be in my mid-40s, and I shouldn't continue to create the new organizations and claim to be the voice of youth. So there will be a new generation coming. They will be able to identify what the opportunities are and try to use the lessons we or others have to create new things. I think that's what makes it more vibrant than the same people doing similar things over and over in different avatars, No,
but it's good. At least you start to pave the way for the next thing to time. That is great.
Yes, indeed. And I want to ask, because one of your projects is looking at the future, far future. What are innovations that can become successful in the sense of impact? Do you have any ideas?
Lots of ideas. I've talked about fertilizers, but I think the biggest thing in food systems is about meat and dairy consumption. The emissions that comes from livestock, the politics around livestock. It's like $1 trillion a year industry. No change in the food system is going to be complete without a change in meat and dairy. That some people won't agree, but that's my view. I find it also a very polarized view, because some people say we should all stop eating meat and go vegan. Other people say we can still do whatever we want. I think the reality is somewhere in the middle. People are not going to stop eating meat. Some people will reduce, others won't.
No, I believe it's, from my perspective, it's a matter of balance.
But it also so you mean a worldwide view, right?
Yeah.
So in societies, some people still see meat as a social establishment. There are reasons behind it why meat is on the table and not. And here in the Netherlands, meat is available for almost everyone.
So what I'm trying to say is that I see a future where meat will be part of that future. Maybe less in some places, more in other places. We have to figure it out. So what we are thinking about is what are the solutions which can make livestock production more sustainable. So things like there are certain feed additives, which if you're fed to cows, they reduce their emissions. And there are ideas around vaccines, methanogen vaccines, which inhibit the production of methane. So these are all ideas. It hasn't been proven successful yet. Like feed additives, yes, but not the vaccines.
Yes.
So there are some of these kind of technologies out there, which if they become reality and if they are scaled, we hope that it can make the sector more sustainable.
Yeah, I believe in that it can become more sustainable. Is the problem within, like an example as meat, is the problem not actually the worldwide market that it is playing in? Where does most meat come from? I mean, that's probably South America, right? A lot of meat is like the cows are, well, if we go for
South America, North America, I would say.
yeah. So, and that will be shipped away around the world. That's how, like, so is the biggest impact not made within the whole chain of like how you distribute stuff, or?
I think it's a combination of all of that. I would like to see people who are over consuming meat to reduce their consumption. I would like to see cattle numbers being reduced as well. And I would also like to see the use of technologies amongst the reduced numbers so
Okay.
they're producing less
Yes.
emissions.
Like a cocktail
Yeah.
of
Yeah, in the end, I think always in innovation, it has to be interaction of
yeah.
many things, environment, policy. I think a lot of things play.
I'm not saying we can just go on doing all the things and keep adding more cows, and as long as we have technology. I don't think it works like that.
No, I get it. I agree. Well, I believe that we are reaching more or less the end of the podcast. We are like around the hour, if I'm right. Yeah, it goes faster. Yeah, 1 hour. So we always do these 2 questions at the end of the podcast. They tend to be the easiest one.
Well, for us, not really sometimes.
No, but well, for them also not so.
Okay.
I have to say. So the first one is that we've been making you a lot of questions, and we always think it's fair that you or the guest makes a question back to us. So you can ask us whatever you want.
And what's the second question? So I can
No.
think about it.
That comes later.
Yeah, I think one of the things that strikes me in the conversations we had was maybe other guests you've had, maybe more on the business side, whereas talking to me as an NGO, I don't have a business model. We don't make money, we don't make profits.
Oh.
So I'm curious how you think about this model and what you think could be an incentive for more people to create NGOs.
I am a really pro NGO person. I think that I believe that missions are more authentic where you do not need to chase growth. At the same time, I understand that we need to get money from places. So that's why I understand that for a lot of people to have a business model behind their idea is a way also of chasing that mission that they have. But for me, the incentive to do the NGOs and to work in an NGO, I believe that is basically the fact that you are trying to stay as authentic as possible by the fact of not depending. We could say this with really like a pinch of salt on money. Like, you're not reliant on the performance, in the end performance of your project. And I think that is really, you need to find a source of income. It's important, but as long as you can cover at least enough to put the balance sheet into zero, you have the strength to keep going forward, and you will measure your metrics and things that will make you, in my opinion, feel much more complete than when you have to do it in a business. And in a business, you will have the stress.
We know this concept of a steward ownership, which is going more towards a mission-driven company. But it doesn't come to one of the things that he implements is that there is a strict deadline of like an ending of the organization or company. But I disrupt you in your answer.
No. I think what I wanted to add is that there is like into the things to move forward, to decide to do an NGO. I believe that a person, you can focus much more in what you want to accomplish than when you have to, I said that maybe your goal would be like balance sheet at least has to be zero. In the other case, the balance sheet, you need to be always at least every year more and more, or that is what is desirable in order to keep getting investors, keep getting people.
Yeah, but NGO comes also with the challenges of gathering the subsidies and gathering money for your projects.
I am not saying that it's completely happiness, but you're not.
For me, it's like I'm just not very experienced of getting into a field of establishing an NGO. It's also like, I know you're doing it in this field, but like besides that,
for example, I volunteer for Scouts, and Scouts, every group is an NGO always.
Yes.
Okay. And that maybe is less ambitious than what you have, but in the end, the only thing that we're moved for is the purpose. It's the purpose of educating the kids and teaching the values, going, spending time outside and helping connect. We're not saying, we need to make this money, or we need to make the best campings and we need to increase our power forces. It's just like, we need to make sure that our balance sheet is zero, at least. Sometimes it will be, and most of the times it happens that in the end you get a little more money, and then you just keep that in case that you need it somewhere in some other moment. But you can focus on your mission.
Yeah.
That's how I see it. Sorry if I disrupted you now.
I want to ask you one thing actually before we end. Then, what is
This
one?
is not the second question.
No, like, what is then one tip that you would give away to aspiring youth that wants maybe to create, or I don't know, any person, an NGO?
So, I mean, I asked you this question and great to hear your answers. And I hope that it motivates more people to create NGOs, because I think we need more NGOs. We need more diversity in NGOs. And I think I would really encourage more people to consider that as a career option, because that sense of purpose and mission is really important. It's very fulfilling as well, but it's not easy. It's really confusing. And I think you have to be persistent. Yeah, it's not easy. And you have to really push till the system works for you.
Well, I think it's like for everything. There's people that will be made for NGOs, and there will be people that is not made for NGOs.
Yeah, you have to build your name probably. You have to get credit for your work as well, so you have to show it. But that's the same for businesses, right? Like, businesses are also takes years for actually having a market that is fitting you. There's only one question.
Yeah.
If you have nothing to add, what is your favorite food or dish?
Or your favorite thing to eat.
Not kitchen, because that is too broad.
So I'm from India, in the south of India, and we have something like steamed rice cakes with coconut.
Steamed rice cakes with coconut. It sounds
never
is it sticky?
heard of it.
No.
It's not like a sticky rice mango. No.
Okay, all right.
So that's what I like, and I even make it here in Wageningen. Yesterday.
Nice.
Great. Sounds delicious.
Yeah, it does. Well, Dhanush, if there's nothing more that you would like to share with the audience, in like a last saying or something, then I would say it was, for me, it was a great conversation. I let you talk also in that conversation because I listened a lot, like the audience did. For me, there was so much knowledge, so much things that you shared that I find inspiring, but also a lot of things that are eye openers. Like, so this is how it can work, or this is not how it's working and has to be changed. So thanks for that, for sharing and being honest in this conversation.
Thanks a lot, Dhanush.
Thanks for having me. It was a really fun conversation for me as well.
Nice.